am Margaret Robinson. I'm the Assistant Director for the Office of Interdisciplinary Programs here in the Office of the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs and Faculty Development. It is my honor to welcome you to our very first of the 8-part series on mindfulness and interprofessional education. I'll briefly introduce our speaker and then we will get started with today's activity. A few housekeeping items. This is a live webinar. We are recording today's session. The video is being recorded from the PowerPoint on the computer. To facilitate with the sound recording, we ask that you mute any electronic devices. This seminar series is the result of ongoing research and interest by Dr. Jerry Ibay. Dr. Ibay is an assistant professor and program director for the Masters in Health Administration program in the OUHSC College of Public Health. Did I get Hudson College of Public Health? That's the first time I ever said that. Yay. Jerry has over 10 years of healthcare experience in multiple roles, organization types, and geographies. Prior to academia, he was a manager of clinical information systems for New York Presbyterian Hospital, where he successfully managed a $20 million grant to develop health information exchanges to facilitate care coordination between the hospital and community-based patient-centered medical homes. Dr. Ibay has served in a variety of roles for Bon Secours Health System, including as a Vice President of Strategy and Philanthropy, leading departments through strategic change and with role and staff responsibilities spanning multiple states. He now brings his practical experience to the classroom as Vice Chair and Assistant Professor. Jerry received a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Richmond, earning a double major in Leadership Studies and Speech Communication. He also completed, this is impressive, a dual graduate degree, receiving an MHA from Virginia Commonwealth University and a JD from the University of Richmond School of Law. Both at the same time? That's impressive. Please join me in welcoming today's facilitator, Dr. Jerry Ibay.
Okay, I've been asked to turn this microphone on, so if it's can you guys hear me? Okay. All right, great. Well, thank you for coming. We're going to start off with a little bit of introductions. So you just heard my introduction, and I'd like to just go around. And I know we have some people who are logged in via the webinar, so we will not have them participate, just the people in the room. If you feel compelled, if you're sitting there in front of your computer in your office space, you can tell yourself who you are and what you do. So let's just keep it simple. Just say your name, what college you're associated with. And on a scale of 1 to 10, let me flip through my slides here. So this is our first part about self-awareness. But on a scale of 1 to 10, what is your average stress level? Do you live in the low stress zone or do you live in a high stress zone? So you heard about my background. I'd say my stress level is usually somewhere around 7 to 8 on a continual basis. So yeah, let's just go around the room. Sure.
I'm Laura Scobie. I work in the office of the, sorry, I changed jobs. I'm a residency coordinator for OBGYN and College Medicine. And I would say 7 to 8 also.
Hi, I'm Nikki Nagelson. I'm with OU College of Pharmacy and Clinical Administrative Sciences. I would say probably maybe 3 to 5.
Oh. come teach us, please.
I was asked that yesterday too.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes. If you're speaking, please press your microphone so it turns green. Thank you. Sorry about that.
My name is Michelle Pope. I am with Performance Management and Innovation over at OUHSC. My stress level, probably between 7 and 8.
Hi, my name is Pierre Joe from the library, where my stress level would be 7 to 8.
Hi, I'm Bradford Gilbon, and I'm with the College Valley Health Medical Engineering Radiation Sciences. My stress levels maybe 5 or 6.
Stacy Anderson, College Valley, also medical rehabilitation sciences. I'd say my stress is breathing.
Whoa. All right.
I'm Kendall Kinney. I work at the College of Valley Health and Hudson College of Public Health. My stress level is always a 10 because I'm a fundraiser.
I already introduced myself. I'm Margaret Robinson in Office of Interdisciplinary Programs. And so when I saw the picture, I said, well, I think I can hang out there. It's about maybe some days, maybe two.
Whoa. Whoa. I know. All right, well, thank you. We're gonna return to this concept of stress in a little bit, but I wanted to just get a feeling for the stress level in the room. So this series is about wellness and mindfulness and interprofessionalism. So we're gonna start with wellness. This is a concept called the wellness wheel. So it displays a number of different areas of wellness. When it comes to interprofessional wellness, we're going to focus on the professional and the social. So it is very important for you to maintain physical health and exercise, but that's outside of the scope of this webinar series. We're gonna focus on how you can develop and maintain positive workplace relationships and relationships outside of work, because they all work together. So professional and social wellness. Many of you are familiar with the term emotional intelligence. It was popularized by Daniel Goleman in his book, Emotional Intelligence. And another Dr. Travis Bradbury, he wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0, and he pointed out a number of benefits of having high emotional intelligence. So the biggest one is the number down at the bottom. People with high emotional intelligence average about $30,000 more than their peers who don't have high emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence, according to his research, is responsible for more than half of your job performance. So when you're in your programs, or if you finish your program and you learned all about radiation imaging, or you learned all about library science, that's the content knowledge of your job. But the emotional intelligence, the skills that we'll talk about throughout the series, that's more of your job performance criteria than your content knowledge. So Daniel Goleman was working with some of his colleagues, and they kind of tried to define, well, okay, that's great. Emotional intelligence is great to have, but what is emotional intelligence? And they expanded this concept because Daniel Goleman wrote another book called Social Intelligence. So they combined these concepts and created what they call emotional and social competence. And these are the areas of emotional and social competence. There's 4. So it starts with self-awareness. That's today's topic. Next week, we're going to talk about self-management. The following week, we'll talk about social awareness. And then the 4th week, we'll talk about relationship management. So emotional self-awareness is the ability to recognize and understand your emotions and how they impact your behavior. So we're going to talk today a little bit about emotions, but we're primarily going to talk about behavior. And this is why. Let's see here. So this is giving you a little bit of an overview of this webinar series. If you're able to attend all 8 sessions, this is how we will work through the series. The first, I would say the fall sessions, these 4 sessions in the fall, focus on interpersonal effectiveness. So this is your relationship with your coworker, your relationship with your spouse, your relationship with your child, your relationship with your teammates. So it's mainly about one-on-one, or maybe one to small group. How do you interact well with other people? And there's the four sides to it. This is the 4 domains of emotional and social competence we just reviewed. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take that framework and we're going to apply it to interprofessional teams. So instead of self-awareness, now we're going to talk about your role awareness. So as a pharmacist, how do you assess your role as a pharmacist? When you're managing that role, how do you determine whether or not you are going to participate in a decision for the team? How do you decide if you're going to say, nope, this is actually not my role for this decision. I'm going to let the rest of the team, I'm going to let the social worker step in and handle this social issue. Then we're going to take the interprofessional awareness. How can you bring greater awareness to how the entire group fits in with one another? And how can you do some or what strategies are there to try to facilitate optimal communication and relationships amongst an interprofessional team. So that's, in a nutshell, our 8-part series. In the fall, we're going to talk about interprofessional effectiveness, and in the spring, we're going to talk about interprofessional. Did I say that wrong? Interpersonal effectiveness in the fall, interprofessional effectiveness in the spring. Okay, so while I believe emotional self-awareness is very important, as I said before, what I want to focus on today is behavioral self-awareness. For many of you, you've seen probably some sort of image like this before in the past with an iceberg, and you can only see the tip of the iceberg, but the majority of the iceberg is actually underwater. I was just in Hawaii, and they were saying that some of the mountains in Hawaii are the tallest mountains in the world, but most people don't realize it because most of it's underneath the water. And so I think the mountain I was on is the second tallest mountain in the world, but it's only maybe 10,000 feet, but it's, I don't know, 30, 40,000 feet below water. So in the same way, just like an iceberg or a mountain, we have a lot of us that makes up who we are. But often what people see is just the tip of the iceberg or the tip of the mountain. And so people can make judgments about us. Have you ever had a situation where you did something and somebody interpreted it a little bit differently than you intended? That's because your feelings and your motivations, your intentions, don't always get communicated. We're going to do an exercise later on to try to display that a little bit viscerally. But let's start with a more, I think, a more fun example. So let's get a show of hands. Raise your hand if you think you're funny. There was confidence in that hand raising. Okay, why do you think you're funny?
I think I have a good easygoing approach to life, and I think that makes me a little more lighthearted in approach and able to see different aspects of things.
All right, what about somebody else? Who else raised their hand? Why do you think you're funny?
Because I can make people laugh.
Okay, so you get a response from people. Okay, that's good. Maybe one more. Why do you think you're funny?
The same, people laugh a lot whenever I'm talking, and so I assume that means I'm funny.
They could be laughing at it.
Right, that's true. They could be laughing at you. That's right. But so if we take it back to what we talked about before, so emotional self-awareness, you might feel like you're funny, okay? Or you can have cognitive self-awareness where you may think you're really funny. I think after every single sentence my wife says, she says, "Man, I'm funny." Like after everything she says, she's like, "I'm really funny." And so, I mean, at this point now, it's kind of funny that she keeps saying it because she really thinks she's funny. But here's another question for you. So, especially for those of you who raise your hand, are you funny all the time? Or does everybody think you're funny? Yeah, so being funny is it's a contextual thing. It's based on the circumstances. Something that you could do around your friends from high school or college may not be appropriate to do in a boardroom, for example. So being funny has a lot to do with the context and a lot to do with the people. But so we can often think we're funny, which is cool. But I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect. In essence, this talks about how we can be a little bit delusional about our competencies. So let's say we're talking about being funny. Somebody who maybe is not funny to anyone, they may have a feeling that they are the funniest person and they are just undiscovered. And over time, let's say this person were to go out and try a stand-up routine and no one's laughing. Then they get some feedback and they say, okay, hold on a second, maybe I'm not so funny after all. And they start heading down the slope. But they keep practicing, Eventually they develop some jokes that work. And over time, they get to this point where they realize based on, okay, every time I go and do my stand-up routine, I'm getting some laughs, and I get asked to come back. All right, so I must be doing something right. I must be at least a little funny to some people some of the time. But you'll notice that it actually stops below that level of that initial confidence. So even though, and you've probably experienced this in your career or in your personal life, is that as you learn more about something or as you practice something, you're realizing that you still have a long way to go. And you have to take that learner's or beginner's mindset with you. All right, so I'm going to just share with you some other examples outside of comedy about how we can be a little bit delusional about our confidence. And for any of you that attended the Surgeon General's talk the other morning, he mentioned one of these studies. He said that 80% of people think they're above average drivers. And so let's just take a look. Who here thinks they're above average driver? Yeah. Okay, so that's actually surprising. Most of the time, most people raise their hand. And this happened to me just yesterday. I was driving to the gym, and you're making a little turn, and somebody's coming around the corner, and they're cutting off that corner too tight, and I mean, seriously, like, what a jerk, right? So I'm driving through, and then I see a spot, but I've got to take a little bit of a wide thing because I gotta get into that spot. So I'm taking this wide turn, and somebody's coming right at me, and I realize I'm in their space because I'm taking this really wide turn. But of course, I'm not a jerk. So I have reasons for everything that I do, but anytime somebody does something to me, they're obviously just making me mad on purpose. And so, most of us think that we're really good drivers, but statistically speaking, that can't be true. I'm going to share with you another one. So some of us work with students. I'll share one about students. They asked high school students, over 1 million high school seniors. This is a big end there. They asked over 1 million high school seniors, how do you rate your ability to get along with other people? 25% of them rated themselves in the top 1%. 25%. How many people would you guess rated themselves just below average? I'm not great. No, I'm a little bit below average. 2%. So high school seniors are a little delusional about their ability to get along with others. Many people tend to be delusional about their car driving. Some of us here are faculty, so I've got a little statistic about faculty. How many college professors do you think, they did this famous study, and they asked college professors, do you think you're above average at your job? 94% said yes. Yes, clearly. And how many of you, where's your hand? How many of you think you're above average at your job? Well, I hope you all raise your hands. I hope you all raise your hands. If anyone's watching the webinar, they all raise their hands, and they all are objectively great at their job, I'm sure. Daniel Kahneman, he's one of the behavioral economists, he had a quote, and he said, human beings possess an almost unlimited ability to ignore our ignorance. And so it's very convenient to ignore the areas where we struggle. And here's another image to show that. So they've done other studies where they show emotional intelligence and job titles. So as we talked about before, emotional intelligence is what gets you, promoted. Like you have to, if you're an engineer, you can't just do your job. You have to be able to motivate people. You have to be able to help people do their job. And so as you learn emotional intelligence, or as you're able to utilize it in the workplace, you start getting promotions. But wait, hold on a second. Then something happens. At a certain point, it starts going down. And it's because you start surrounding yourself with people who maybe give you less feedback. You start thinking that you now understand how to do things. And so we see that no one's immune to self-delusion. And even people who have successfully employed self-awareness and emotional intelligence, at some point, we see the research shows that people start to backslide because it's a practice. This is something you need to continually refine. Okay, so let's go back to that example of being funny. So maybe you think you're funny. Maybe everyone else doesn't think you're funny, but know who else probably thinks you're funny? Your mom, your dad. They're almost always telling you, oh, you're beautiful, you're funny, you can do anything. And so our family and friends, they can often give us feedback, but that feedback is usually a little biased. And so our family and friends, when it comes to emotional intelligence, so let's say one of the aspects of emotional intelligence is being a good listener. Now you can ask yourself, am I a good listener? And you probably get a pretty positive response. Yeah, I'm a pretty good listener. Okay, great. Check, I'm a good listener. But wait, let's just check that. Mom, do you think I'm a good listener? She's probably gonna say yes. So the point there is that family and friends, and we're gonna talk about this model a little bit later called social style. And the research from social style says that they used to ask, if you would take this assessment to judge your behavioral style, then they would ask you to get feedback from other people. And they saw through their research, family and friends who provide feedback is virtually useless. Because they're going to tell you exactly what you want to hear. And so they said the best feedback to get is from people you work with, people who have a vested interest in you being a better listener, because it's going to help them in their job. So when it comes to self-awareness, those are the main points, that we tend to be self-delusional, and then we tend to try to get feedback from people who aren't going to give us great feedback, our family and friends. So the way we want to try to approach assessing our self-awareness is by asking the people that we work with or the people that we have less of a familial relationship. Because we can often see ourselves a little bit differently than reality. In fact, there's another research that shows that other people, so we're going to get into this model called social style, and what I want us to think about doing this model is, some of you may think, well, I don't always act that way. I'm not always late. There are people that, if I ask you to think in your mind, like, do you know somebody who's almost always late to a meeting? You probably think of somebody. That person might be you. But you might be saying, well, I'm not always late. But they've actually shown that other people can often predict our future behavior better than we can ourselves. So other people, because they know that you're typically late to a meeting, you've told yourself, I've got to be somewhere Friday at 3 o'clock. I'm going to be there on time. Everybody else in the meeting knows you're not. And they know that, okay, we're going to have to wait for him to show up 3 or whatever, because odds are he's going to be late. All right, so let's get into this model. It's called social style. I love this model because it focuses on objective, observable behaviors. In a similar way to this iceberg analogy, social style likes to use an analogy of a pie. So they call it the personality pie. So whenever you get a pie from the store, like if you were to buy this pie from the store, how would you know what kind of pie it is? Well, sometimes there's like cherries oozing out of it or apples like kind of on the side of it, but typically you need to look at the label because you don't know what kind of pie it is just from the crust. The crust is the crust, but there's something inside. So the same way, all of our internal beliefs, motivations, our desires, that's often hidden from view, but our exterior, our crust, that's what's visible to other people, and that's what people see. So what I love about social styles, it focuses on the outside. It focuses on your say and do behaviors. So these are some examples. You may have certain traits, right? You may be hardworking. You may be lazy. Or people can make judgments on you. So you might work all the time, and they might think you're stressed all the time. But you may not be stressed. You may just love working all the time. So what I love about social styles is it focuses not on your inherent traits or judgments that people make about you, but those observable say and do behaviors. Okay, so let's try a little activity here. I want you to take out a piece of paper and a pen. If you don't have one, raise your hand. I'll come bring some by. And what I want you to do is on this piece of paper, just like it has here, write down, draw a horizontal line. Who else needs a piece of paper? Okay. Was that everyone? And if you need, anyone need a pen? All right, Michelle, I'm trying to throw this pen to you. Are you okay if I throw it to you? Sure. Here we go. Oh! Okay, so draw a horizontal line, and on the left side you're going to write ask, and on the right side you're going to say tell. And these are some say and do behaviors that I want you to think about. So ask yourself, do you tend to speak slower or faster? Do you tend to use less words or more words? Go through this list here, and all you're doing is just put an X on your line where do you think you fall on that continuum. Are you more of an asker or more of a teller? I'll give you a very specific example. It's Friday. Many of you might be going out to eat, maybe with some friends, maybe with some family. So you call up your friend or your family member, and you say, hey, you want to go get something to eat? Okay, what's the next thing that comes out of your mouth? Is it, I want to go with Indian and let's go to this restaurant? Or is it, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? So most of us tend to either ask in more situations or tell in those situations. Okay, so that's your first one. Now, so everyone has their X on their paper? Somewhere along that continuum? Okay, now draw a vertical line that intersects with the horizontal line, you're making a quadrant. So you got a vertical line, and you're gonna have the top labeled control, and the bottom says emotes. And here are your say and do behaviors for control and emote. So excuse me, this has to deal with, do you tend to be more animated, less animated? Do you tend to use body motions more or less? Are you louder when you speak, quieter when you speak? So again, put an X somewhere along that line. So you should have two X's. Maybe you have an X and a Y. You have two X's or an X and a Y, and they should fall into one of these quadrants. Does everyone have their quadrant that their letters fell into? Okay, so this is what we want to do. We're going to take just 5 minutes here. We're going to do a quick activity. And I do want you to actually move for this activity. Anyone here, is anyone here more telling, more controlling? Raise your hand. Okay, anyone here more emoting and telling? Okay. And then same thing with asking and emoting, asking and control. So what you want to do is find your group, and that's why we're in front of the room. So it seems like there are no people who are in the front quadrant here, but you would sit here and work together. Maybe the people who are emoting and telling sit back there and work together. And then we have our emoters and askers back here, and our controllers and askers over here in the front. So try to find your group real quickly. And then the task is you're going to have a couple minutes. You won't take too long with it. But here's the task. You have been assigned to plan a department social event. That's the only clarification you have. Take a couple minutes and try to plan your department social event.
Is this ask control?
Yeah, in the back there is the asking and emoting.
I'm ask control.
Ask control, yeah, right here. Yeah, ask control, tell, emote. You're tell control? Okay, all right, that's okay. No, actually, I would say, you guys are on your own. So let's say your boss came to you and said, you have to plan a social event. So how would you go about the process? So if you're joining us online, if you're on the webinar, I would just do the practice on your own. So imagine, excuse me, imagine that your boss came to you and said, you have 5 minutes to plan a department social event. So that's all the direction you have. How would you go about doing that? Oh, yeah. These?
Okay.
You're planning a department social event. That's all you get.
And we're going to tell you about our.
Not too much. We're going to talk about your approach to it. 2 more minutes. So yeah, you have 2 more minutes to plan your department social events. Hey, you're planning it. You're planning an event. How do you choose your process? One more minute. One more minute. Okay, let's bring it back. You can stay in your positions, but just turn around and take a look here. So, how many of you, when we talked about planning a social event, this is what you thought of? How many of you? How many of you, this would be a nightmare social event with your coworkers? Yeah, so let's talk through it. So we have a soul member here in our telling and controlling. And the reason I mentioned ask or tell first is that's the more dominant behavior, is whether you're an asker or teller. The secondary behavior being is whether you are a controller or a noter. So we have a teller and a controller. What was the process when you first heard about planning a department social event? What were you thinking?
First of all, I'm not super big fan of social events. But also, so may not be really great person to plan social event. That's for sure. If I have to do that, but at the same time, I'm really great to participate in activities anyway. Even though I'm not super fan of doing that anyway. But once actually I'm in the event, I'm enjoying it anyway. That's kind of nature. But if I don't have to worry about that, that would be easier for me, that's for sure. So if even then, if I still have to do that, I will just kind of keep groups. And also I like simpler, especially for social events. Just to really have dinner and then some drink. Okay. So let's get together and then go to a restaurant or just to kind of be there. We get eat and drink and talking. That's it. And if people don't want to come, that's fine with me. So that's how I would. Okay, so that was pretty terrible.
There's no terrible here. There's no judgment. So if I were your boss and I said, I want to plan, what would be your first question you'd ask me?
When would that be? How many people? And what's the purpose of these?
Okay, good. All right, let's remember that. Let's remember those questions. Basically, why? Why are we having a social event? Okay, so let's have the next group. So these are the tellers and the noters. I asked you to plan a department social event. What were you thinking? Or how are you feeling?
We feel ecstatic because we love events, especially social events.
Yeah, so we just sort of moved forward. It wasn't really a why, it was just, okay, we're going to do a social event. So let's pick a date or try and have the majority of people. So maybe we take a poll of who's available when. Maybe we consider things like people have kids or a second job or something, but we're really going to go with the biggest bang for our buck. So whoever can come, or the most people that can come, that's what we're going to do.
Great.
And then our list of things that happen after that, really long.
The things that happen after.
Yeah, after we pick our date and everything, then we've already outlined our next steps and what we're moving forward.
So what would be, all right, I just asked you to plan the department social event. What's your first, you get one question you can ask me. What question would you ask me?
Where are we going?
If there's a theme, maybe.
Okay, see? All right, perfect. Perfect. You want a theme? You like toga parties or luau's. Yeah, it's gotta have a theme. It's gotta be, it can't just be a get together, it's gotta be fun. Okay, so now we have our askers and emoters. All right, you had to plan a corporate company social event, department social event. What was your process?
We would see if we think we could make a decision because we're
asking all the time.
Yeah, we want to be really accommodating, so we want everyone to be there. And instead of where she was like, hey, you can come, great, if not, I don't really care. We want as many people to go. So we're trying to be thoughtful of others as well, so that it was, you know.
So we were planning a birthday within the department, and we found out the date of the birthday and decided the week before because it's in the holiday area. And she was concerned about, well, what time of the day? Do we do it during the workday or do we do it after?
Yeah.
And we decided we would be family friendly.
Yeah, more people, more the better.
So like a Dave and Buster's, so that way there is, you know, the adult beverages if you like to partake, but also family friendly for stuff for the kids to stay busy with.
Yeah. Try to please everybody. That's
Yeah,
right.
I mean,
Yes.
bring it back to the happy hour, an early work early happy hour.
Yeah.
Still be able to get kids.
And see, that's the challenge is if they had a theme, let's say their theme was a luau. Now you might be thinking, oh, there's people who don't know what a luau is, or there's people who don't want to wear that kind of wear. So, all right. So your one question. I said, hey, let's plan a department social event. You get one question. What would you ask?
Well, our first question was, what's the purpose of the party?
Okay.
What was our first? And we just answered it.
All right. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, this is our last group. These are the tellers, controllers. All right.
Askers.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, correct. Askers, controllers.
You go ahead.
We decided that we would have a lunchtime potluck snack day. And we would, the first thing we would do is put together like a list of choices, and then we would do a poll and have people choose what they would prefer. And we were going to do that with a theme, and then we would have people, based on that, what they chose, then we would do a sign-up sheet for the appropriate food items that would correspond with the same theme, and go from there.
Okay, great. What's your one question?
What did you have in mind?
Perfect. Okay. All right. So let's look at what these areas are called according to social style. So over here in the front, these are what are called driving style. So I want to make sure we don't say drivers, but these are people who have a driving style of behavior. In the back there, we have people who have an expressive style of behavior. In the back on this side, we have amiable style. In the front here, we have analytic style. Now, as you can imagine, these styles have different behavioral themes. So these are some of the descriptive words that you can use for these styles. And just like we talked about before with funny, being funny, no one's funny all the time in every context. So if you're an expressive style, for instance, you're not always behaving this way, but you tend to behave this way in most situations with most people. Does this seem aligned with what you're thinking? Okay. I have a little bit of quotes here that kind of typify these styles. So the driving style, your quote is, let's just get it done now. Like, I think we saw that with the party thing. It's like, why are we doing this? Like, this is not work related. Like, how is this related to work? The expressives are, hey, I have an idea, it's gonna be great. They don't care what the budget is, they don't care what the logistics are, it's all gonna work out because every idea they have is great and the details will work themselves out. The amiables are all for one and one for all. As long as everyone's there and everyone's happy, it's a successful event. That's all that really matters. And the analyticals are just the facts. Like, why do we want to do this? Give me the reasons why, and then I'll make a plan, and then we'll do it, and it'll be over. Then I can get back to what I was doing. Okay, so another couple of interesting characteristics of these social styles are their main style need, their orientation, and their growth action. So I will give you an example. Can anyone here guess what my style is? Driving, expressive, amiable, analytical.
Expressive. You're one of them.
So I would say, okay, so here's what's interesting is I think I'm expressive, but I have had people take this assessment for me, and the consensus is that I'm amiable. So I'm back there and not here. So that brings up one point that I wanted to make, is that when people take their social style assessment, 47% or almost half of people see themselves differently than other people do. So it's very likely that in this room, maybe half of you would actually be analytical, and another half would be, you might come down here to driving. So it's all about how people see the tip of the iceberg or the crust, as opposed to your motivation test. Question?
I'm sorry, are we allowed to ask?
Of course.
Okay, says the asker. I was thinking when I was filling out our little question, what we were determining who we were, I tend to have a different personality when I feel comfortable with my family and friends than I do at work. Right?
Situational.
Yeah, situational, exactly. So is that normal? Is that figure into this somewhere?
Okay, great question. So the question is, well, maybe I have one style at home and another style at work. So it depends. Let's say you are promoted from being, I use the example of an engineer. You're an engineer, you have all these coworkers, and now you're promoted to the manager. You do have to have a more driving type of style where you're moving for action and you're pushing for results. But for the most part, what you're doing is you're assessing yourself according to like the general population. In regards to most other people, do I tend to ask more or tell more? And what the research has shown is that you are the same style at work or at home. It just may be expressed a little bit more along the continuum in one hand than the other, but your natural way of reacting. So let's say, for instance, for me, as I'm an amiable, my orientation is, my almost initial thought with every situation is, how is this going to affect my relationships? How is this going to affect other people's relationships? So I'm always thinking about relationships, whereas the drivers are thinking about, how's this going to affect results? If it's not affecting results, that's secondary, whereas the animals are about relationships and the needs, that gets expressed in different needs. So the animal's need is security. Like, if people aren't going to like this, I'm not down for that, because then that means it's going to be tension between them, and if relational tension is bad. The drivers like relational tension is neutral. It doesn't really matter as long as the work is getting done. And then, as you can imagine, there's a lot of strengths that come from having your particular style of behaviors. So drivers get things done. But what they tend to struggle with is listening and making sure that everyone's viewpoint is taken into account. Expressives, they have great ideas, they're the innovators, they're the ones that you want to brainstorm with, but you may not want to have them take the minutes. Because they're the ones who have to take the minutes, they have all these drawings and doodles, and they're like, is this good? They're like, it's in here. And then the amiables, they are great relationship builders, but as you guys said, even in your description, you struggle to make decisions because you just want to see, I'm sure somebody else wants to weigh in on this, and let's make sure we ask this person what they think. And unless we've heard from everybody, then how do we know that we're making the best decision? Because somebody might miss it. And the analyticals, so my wife is an analytical, and they are great because they are the ones who you want steering that ship. They're the ones who you want. The driver's like, we're going to go there. The analytical's like, I know, but I'm going to be the one actually doing it. And so the analyticals actually do all the work, and they're always right. Right, they're always right. What that could also mean is their growth action is to make sure that they state their opinions. Because when you're always right, what also means that you tend to want to make sure you have all the evidence you need, and you don't want to make a decision before you know that you're right. Other people might be waiting and they're saying, we got to start deciding here. You're like, I know, but I'm not ready to decide. So we each have, according to our style, the way that we interact with others and also the growth areas. We're not calling it a weakness, we're calling it a growth area. Okay, so in healthcare, this is the breakdown of the distribution in healthcare. Now, one of my interest areas and research areas is trying to figure out what this means more specifically. So this is great because when you complete the social style assessment, you indicate which industry you work in. Healthcare, energy, retail, computer science. So all healthcare workers who have ever done a social style assessment, this is how they break down. So you see there's more analyticals than the other styles. But to me, I don't know, just based on my experience, I think if you asked a group of neurosurgeons to complete this, it might be less analyticals and maybe more what? You guys know neurosurgeons or orthopedic surgeons. What style would you say that they tend to be? Yeah, most people tend to see them as driving styles. Whereas if you were to talk to, let's say, pediatric social workers, what styles would they tend to be? probably amiable. And so that's where I want to take my interest area and research areas to try to figure out if we can determine according to professions, according to even within professions. So a nurse who wants to work in a step-down unit will probably have a different behavioral style than somebody who wants to work in trauma. So let's look at another one, because we're here in an educational setting. Here's how the educational one breaks down. So we see a lot less driving style and pretty evenly distributed amongst the other three styles, with amiables being a little bit at the top. But it's really the other three styles trying to keep those drivers from taking things over in education. Okay, so I asked before about our stress levels, and I just want to make a note about how our stress level is related to our style. So and you may experience this, when you're hanging out with a friend that you've had for a really long time, it doesn't really matter if this person's interrupting you. It doesn't really matter if this person is having great ideas and you know they're not going to follow up, because there's no tension there. You figure out a way to work with that person that works for you. But when there's stress, this is when our styles can get expressed a little bit more entrenched. So, for instance, as an analytical, you may want to, in the back of your mind, think, okay, we really have to have a plan, but we don't have to make a decision for another 9 months. So I'm cool with whatever people decide, because I know at the last minute I can always go in there and save everybody. But if it's now 9 months later and no one's done anything, now you're like, hold on a second, I'm going to make a decision here because everyone else is not going to. So your style gets expressed more under stress. So low stress, low conflict, it's less easy, or it's not as easy to tell someone's style, but when they're under stress, you can tell their style a lot more easily. So what we're going to see here is what are called backup behaviors. So a backup behavior is when you're trying to make something happen according to your style. So whether it's driving for results, bringing up new ideas, making sure everyone's happy, or making sure we make the right decision. If you keep doing that, but it's not working, sometimes what happens is we enter backup behavior. We're stressed, and now we're like, okay, now I've reached the point where I've got to do what I've got to do. So just think of the A's. The drivers, they become very autocratic. So they're just like, all right, I gave you guys a chance. It didn't happen, so here's the plan. And that's the deal. The expressives, they tend to attack. They'll say things like, I told you that this was going to happen. You had your opportunity, and you're a terrible person. And then the challenge with the expressives is they will attack, and they got it off their chest. That's a phrase I like to use. Like, I'm glad I got that off my chest. All right, everybody feel better? And everyone's like, no. They're like, well, but I do. I'm ready to move on. And of course, the amiables, if that happens to you, you're like, no, I don't feel good. But your backup behavior is you just acquiesce. You're like, yep. You nod your head. You're like, oh, yep, sounds good, sounds good. And then after that door closes, you call up somebody. You're like, that's terrible. This is terrible. But in front of that person, you're like, it's all good. And the analyticals, your backup behavior is you avoid. So it's a similar but a little different. You avoid meaning, I've got to go back to my office, and I've got to close the door, and I've got to do work because no one's doing work here, and I'm going to do it. And people might be expecting you to go to a meeting. You're like, those meetings suck. Nothing gets happened. Nothing gets done. I'm going to do the work. I'm going to be alone. And you may have missed a key point that was discussed in the meeting. So these are our backup behaviors, and that's really how this all comes along together. Being self-aware is trying to be aware of how your stress is affecting the expression of your style and how it affects other people that you're interacting with. So let's see here. I have one last thought here. Just another point to note is that your backup behavior, it occurs within that relationship that's causing that stress. So as an example, let's say you're having a really tense day at work, you're stressed, the person who's causing you stress comes into your office, you may exhibit this backup behavior with them. So you may attack them, you may acquiesce to them, you may ignore them, or you may just take over. You're like, yeah, I hear you, but that's not going to happen. This is what's going to happen. That's backup behavior. There's another type of behavior that we can exhibit, and the term for it is called bucket dumping. And it's similar to your backup behavior, but the difference is that it's not with the person who's causing you that stress. So now when you go home, maybe you attack your spouse, or maybe you become autocratic with your kids, or whatever it is. So bucket dumping isn't always negative. Backup behavior is almost always negative. There's very few positive things that happen from backup behavior. But bucket dumping can be positive. This might be where you had to go out for a run, or maybe you had to have your quiet time, or you need like some alone time. So it could be something where bucket dumping can be positive. It can be a way to relieve the stress that you're feeling. But in a workplace situation, when you engage in backup behavior, just remember that that's almost always a negative situation. Okay, so let me see here. We're going to switch over. That's all. That's pretty much all of what I want to say about social style and stress and tension. So we're going to move into our embodied practice right now. So this is what I would like you to do.